record button. Oh,
Wait,
not logged in, right?
There we go.
Awesome. In that case, then let's go ahead and start with new faces. It doesn't appear that we have actually any new faces today. So we can move along rather quickly then to outstanding RFCs. Let me share my screen. Okay, first up, we have this initial version RFC semantic version tags. This has actually had a fair amount of back and forth on it since our last meeting. I followed up on my action item to basically say, hey, this is what your RFC says. Is this what you actually mean? And the person responded with, yes, I do mean what I say in my RFC. And this is the like behavior that I'm expecting. So in that case, then I think it just comes down to approval from a supermajority of, or approval from the steering committee. I don't remember how these works. And then stories to set up compliance for it. Any other commenting on this? I see Frankie, you said something yesterday that I didn't have a chance to respond to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it should block anything about this RFC. It just seems like even once this merges, we haven't necessarily resolved the issue of like, are we releasing features in a way that's making it hard for people to get on the latest version?
Okay, for sure. That's fair. All right, is there any more commentary on this RFC in particular? Great. Next up, we have another Team Java RFC. I can just skip over this one real quick if there's not anything to talk about with this, Dan.
We're just kind of letting this one sit for a little bit to try to gather some more feedback before we go ahead with it. So if anyone has feedback, go ahead and add it.
Awesome. Go bomb RFC. This doesn't need to be discussed too broadly here, but as was indicated at the bottom about yesterday, there has been a large rewrite of this RFC. So if you are a person that commented on it previously, you should go in and reread it and see if some of your commentary has been either addressed or new commentary is needed. I think I'll just leave it at that. Next up is the RFC to auto-generate reference documentation. There has been a pretty long in-depth thread about alternatives to our currently proposed structure, which is adding a new document that would house additional reference documentation, and instead putting that in the README. I just want to make everyone, I would like to talk about this later today in the meeting if we have time, just so that I can have more opinions on this. But if that's not the case, I would also like people to go ahead and check this out asynchronously and have opinions on it, because the largest interactor and user of this is contributors to the project, which looking around, all of you are. So you are the user. Other than that, I would like to bring this up in more in depth. Next up, we have an RFC that updates some links in a node subfolder. I think that this just needs approval from some Node.js maintainers. I'll just go in and check and we can merge this. So that's all that this is. And then finally, the new star of the show, we have RFC for Explorations repository.
It looks like this has approvals from 2 steering committee members. I haven't done anything other than like clean it up a little bit since last time. The last like bike shedding question is the name, but if no one has opposition to explorations, then that's just fine with me.
That'd be great. I think Sophie, you and I might also have some stuff kicking around from our bill of materials exploration that we might want to put into there as well.
Definitely.
Which we can, I don't know, needs to be part of the RFC. We could just PR that in.
Is there anything blocking merge on this as far as the steering committee is concerned?
Nothing. I just wanted us to mention it at a meeting. It had only been open for 4 days. So I wanted us to actually talk about it at a working group, even though it already had approval from everyone involved.
Sure. I guess as it's written right now, it proposes a new repository being the responsibility of the content maintainers team. So it might be nice to just like get a thumbs up from some of those people. Yeah, okay, Forrest. That's
And
great.
I think
That's
that
like
Ryan
half of
approved it
us.
and you
Yeah,
put it
great.
in, so that's a
So
super
then
majority.
that's great. Perfect. Seems like everybody loves this. Phenomenal.
Victoria, do you have any, as a newly minted content maintainer, do you have any issues with this being a thing underneath the purview of your maintainership?
No issues.
Cool. In that case, then we have flown through these RFCs and pull requests. So I think that was all of them. Yeah. Let's take a look. We have a standing item for any discussions of libcmd v2 updates and questions. At the top of this standing item, I'm going to say that it is the week in which there is a Buildpack authors team sync on Friday. So if that is something that you're interested in going to, hit up the community page for on buildpacks.io. Is there anything that we want to add to this? I think that the only thing that I would talk about further is actually probing them to see when they're planning on starting to merge things to the V2 branch, because they have a branch that I believe that they switched the head of the PR that Ryan, you opened to point at that V2 branch. Just finding out why they haven't merged that in. So because once they merge that in, I think that gives us some freedom to open up our own sort of development / switch over branch in Packet and play around with that. So the sooner that we have it on an official branch, the better. Semi-official branch, whatever. I'm only going to take that as an action item, which is to poke the bear. Great. And with that, then we can
Wait, really quick. Sorry. I had an action item from said sub-team sync to raise the call for feedback on the Buildpacks.io documentation. So if you have not yet taken an opportunity to look at the open issues on that documentation, there's a link to it in the minutes from the October 12th meeting. Please just like head over to those issues, give them a skim, just like pop a couple of thumbs ups on docs. issues that seem relevant to you, or like, yes, this would be great to document, just to give them some hints on where to focus their energies.
All right. With that, I'm going to launch back into the auto-generated RFC documentation and talk a little bit about the larger conversation that's been happening, because I'd like to give it in more of a open forum as opposed to this thread, because it might have been hidden to some inside this thread. So for those of you who aren't familiar, we're currently working on an initiative to try and make it so that we have more complete reference documentation for our build packs, and our solution to that is to do some form of auto generation for them. So taking certain amounts of configuration from the build pack toml and turning those into forms of reference documentation. But we also were proposing an additional file that would allow you to do some more free form or less standard form documentation, and it would allow you to contain all of the reference documentation for a given build pack inside of the repository that concerns that build pack in particular. So that's just what is standing right now for this RFC. In the discussion on this, Dan has proposed a potential alternative to an additional documentation, which is parsing that information out of the README for the like GitHub page, or for the repository, which Dan has very cleanly laid out here in terms of the actual sort of functionality. And I guess what I wanted to propose to y'all is sort of the two sides of this coin, and let you all know that this thread exists, and if you have any sort of long form opinions that you would like captured there, you should go there. And if you'd like to think about this, you should go there afterwards after forming an opinion. And B, see if there's any opinions that we could get out right now into the open and hopefully move this along, because I don't think that the idea of moving things into the README is without merit, but it would cause us to need to pivot quite a bit in what we are proposing in our RFC. So before we do that, I want to have more buy-in that this is a format that would be appreciated by the current set of maintainers.
Yes, I haven't actually read through the entire thread, but the first thing that comes to mind with, and I'm so sorry if this is in the thread, I will definitely read it after this. Like, I think we moved a lot of information out of some of our READMEs so that we had a separation of like what you can see in the README versus like what's in our docs, so that those things weren't like completely duplicated. I don't know if it would be slightly confusing if, not confusing, I mean, having more information, but I don't know if it's necessary to have all the docs both in the README and on our doc site.
So I think that in terms of some of the documentation that we have on the doc site, we moved some of it into separate documents and out of the READMEs. I think that the goal would be to either put them back in the READMEs, and then it might be to put them back in the READMEs to have it so that these documents are generated as part of the auto documentation. So it'll still be a piece of documentation that exists, but the only source that it's pulling from is the README. So the other piece is not affected or edited by anyone else. It is just basically a static file that needs to be served somewhere. If that makes sense.
I guess then what's the main argument against using the README that y'all have proposed?
So I would say my biggest argument against using the README is comes down to my concern around understanding for adding new documentation among new contributors or contributors that are moving among different spaces. So part of Dan's proposal is basically a way to provide metadata to the CLI that's generating this that says, hey, these headings should be included in the reference documentation, these headings shouldn't. And I think that makes sense. Like for the most part, like, I don't know that we need some of, Ryan, you had a good example, some of this is how you build the build pack. Like this is how you go into the source code and actually build a build package out of it. I don't think that you would need that in the reference documents because you're theoretically interacting with the build package when you're using the reference docs. But that does mean that this is like metadata that has the potential to change across varying, various repositories, and therefore, like, it just kind of adds like the alternative. Sorry, I'm tripping over myself. The alternative that we've proposed is just a document that is effectively opened and then slammed onto the bottom of the reference docs that we generate out of the build pack toml. So the build pack toml, we go in and we read this configurations page, which has all of the environment variables on it, and we make like an auto-generated form out of that. And then for the additional documentation, what we've done is we basically just append that onto the bottom of that initial document that we wrote. So it's very clear that that's the exact stuff that's going into your reference documentation. And given the placement and naming could be even clearer to a new user, like this is where I go and add new reference documentation, and I don't have to worry about including it in, a CLI metadata file. I think that that's my biggest argument against why we would want to do it.
So I don't know if I have a strong opinion about this sort of like either or, but I definitely strongly bias towards approaches that make it so contributors to our docs need to write as little prose as possible, or like contributors to our build packs need to write as little prose as possible, while still like having readers of the docs read as much good explanation as possible, if that makes sense. So like as a PR reviewer and as a Buildpacks code contributor, I don't really want to be like writing things in a bunch of different places. But as a reader, probably I do want to, like read things that are clear. And so given that, having a reference documentation document and a README separate, to me seems like that's two places where like prose probably needs to be written and it needs to make sense and they probably need to agree. And so I'm not necessarily opposed to the reference documentation being, or the human written reference docs living in not the README, but if that were the case, I would want the README to be generated based on that content, if that makes sense. Like I really only want there to be like one source of human written prose per repo, because otherwise you're sort of having to review different documents and ensure that they agree and things like that. That was a little long-winded, but yeah, feel free to ask questions.
I think the only real question that I have, and I'd propose this to everyone here, is there anything that you would want to include in like reference documentation, or that you wouldn't want to include in your README? So the only exclusive factor that we have here is if you have an additional piece of information that you don't feel is appropriate for a README, but is appropriate for a reference doc.
I can say that on the Java side, that we've been treating the README basically as reference docs, with the thought that if someone is struggling with the build pack or having issues or wants to know more about it, they would probably be likely to go to the build pack repo, and then they would see like, the reference docs. That's kind of why we're approaching it that way.
Okay. And in that case, then it sounds like what you could do at that point is in fact embellish your README because you're not sacrificing your reference docs at that point. Yeah, okay. All right. I don't want to sit here and make everyone stare at each other and think about potential problems for this. I just wanted to highlight that this is a conversation that's happening. If you have super strong opinions one way or the other, by the way, thank you both Frankie and Sophie for your feedback on that. I think that is really helpful. I think that yeah, I just wanted to raise everyone's attention to this, and I think that hopefully we'll be able to come to a decision on either changing our current proposed implementation or not soon. So if you have any feedback that you'd like to get out there, the sooner the better. Obviously, we will change the RFC to reflect that, and if you see that and go, well, hold on now a minute, that's more than fine. But yeah, I just wanted to take a slice of your time to talk about this. All right. With that, I don't want to hold you all hostage with the project that I'm working on. So is there anything else that people want to discuss in this meeting? Great. Well, medium length meeting then. All right. See y'all.